I'm joined now by Bryan with Regions Private Wealth Management. Dan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Dan, what kinds of things should clients be thinking about when creating trusts in their estates?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think one of the most important things to think about is when professionals and planners are dealing with clients and their families is to really dig in deep with some of their issues and concerns, goals, because generally speaking, in the estate planning world, it's a long-term plan. And so trying to dig into to see some of the family dynamics, if leaving a legacy is important to the family, if charitable inclinations are really important to the family, asset protection many times, business transition and succession, and just general, trying to leave a long-lasting legacy for the family is probably the most important thing.
Yes, that legacy, and also making sure that they incorporate all the other goals, because oftentimes people have several goals.
They do. They have many goals, and one of the interesting things that many people think about at times is, well, we have these goals, but over time and in generations to come, will those goals change? In other words, will circumstances change? Will there be changes around the family? We're in a time when there are many more blended families, and thinking about how we deal with blended families, how we think about the tax law changes, and those types of things are things that we want to think about and maintain a flexibility in your estate plan.
And I will certainly ask you about tax considerations in a second, but before we get there, I want to address what are some of the misconceptions surrounding trust?
Yeah. So many people think that trusts under their estate plan cannot be changed. So as many people know, there are revocable trusts that you can create during your lifetime and can change about at any time. But in the future, many people create irrevocable trusts, and they think that means set in stone and they can't change those. Well, with the advent of modern trust law, we find that there's all sorts of changes that you can make. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about some of those changes. In I would say probably recent decades, we found that the modern trust law has moved towards parsing a lot of the duties that used to be placed on trustees. So for instance, the trustee would have responsibility over everything with regard to the trust. Now we're finding that the modern trust law and modernization around that has allowed some of those duties to be placed in certain roles and individuals. It can be family members, the planning lawyers, and those can allow the trust to change over time. And we can talk more about that as well.
And every state is different, and every trust is different.
Yeah, every trust is unique. Even traditional planning, we found that every trust has its own unique type of provision. It's governed by different state laws, and so different states have their different statutes. But what we found is in making those changes over time that there's a role called trust protector as an example. And a trust protector can change the state, can move the trust to a different state, can add or delete beneficiaries, can help with asset protection. If there's a special needs beneficiary, they can actually incorporate some of that language, and they are there to guide the trustee. So in recent years, asset protection, we're in a litigious world these days, so asset protection has become really important. And so what we find is many of the states, even though they're different, have some similar statutes and similar advantages. And so as we deal with our client families, it's good to have something like a trust protector, a directed trustee, an investment or distribution advisor within those documents these days.
And how do you make sure that clients are keeping up with these changes in law?
Right. So I think that, and in large part, not only is it are there many good estate planning lawyers out there, but with services like private wealth and many of the financial institutions, a big part of our job is advising clients on those changes. So as I said earlier, many of the clients are not aware of these types of things. They think that trusts are set in stone, they're too complicated, too restricted, and so what we try to do is fill a role of being able to come and advise the clients on how there can be a modification to the trust in the future. If there are concerns around the family dynamics, as an example, we've seen this over the years, divorce, substance abuse with family members, special needs children, a lot of those things can be incorporated later on in the trust.
It doesn't have to be set in stone, as you said.
It doesn't have to be set in stone.
And I do want to talk some about taxes as well. What are some important considerations when it comes to taxes and making the most of the trust?
Yeah, certainly, some of the issues that we find these days with the estate tax exemption levels being so high, estate tax is not always the biggest concern for many families, but there's still a need to do trust, and it's not just for tax purposes. But what we find is many states have more favorable tax jurisdictions. So you may find a state that doesn't have an in-state income tax, and so there may be a need for the trust protector that I mentioned earlier to move the situs of that trust, governing law, and even tax jurisdiction to a state that does not have income tax. So that's a huge benefit by having a trust protector, as we mentioned earlier.
Dan, any final thoughts that clients should keep in mind? Flexibility, how important is that?
Yeah, it's extremely important to remain flexible and also think about the long term as best you can, but just know that, again, modern trust law has come around a long way, and understand that that families, as they think about their goals, their concerns, their families in the future, that if there are changes that come about, and there will be, changes in tax law, changes in family circumstances, that just know that there are tools in place now with the modern trust law to make those changes in the future.
Thanks so much for joining us, Dan.
Thank you again for having me.